In the winter of 1206, survival on the steppe was not guaranteed by walls, laws, or harvests. It depended on movement, loyalty, and fear. A single storm could erase a family. A stolen horse could become a blood feud lasting generation. Children learned to ride before they could properly walk, because slowness meant death, and weakness invited conquest. This was the world that produced a man named Temujin. And within a generation, that world would erupt outward with such force that entire cities would vanish beneath it. If you like this kind of history, subscribe to the channel, support the video with a like, and share it with others who seek to understand the past. And in the comments, tell me where you're listening from. I would like to know. The story you're watching is supported by authentic historical records and academic studies. You can view some of these sources on the screen, and all references are listed in the description for transparency. From Korea to Hungary, from the forests of Russia to the gates of Baghdad, the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath Mongol horses. Chroniclers described rivers clogged with bodies, towers built from skulls, smoke rising for weeks above conquered cities. Yet the same empire that spread terror across continents also reopened trade between civilizations, carried ideas across thousands of miles, protected merchants with military precision, and connected East and West in ways the medieval world had never experienced before. It arrived like a catastrophe, and for millions it was. Then it reshaped civilization. Long before the empire existed, the steppe itself had already shaped the people who lived upon it. The grasslands of Central Asia stretched across immense distances, a sea of open land beneath violent weather and unforgiving skies. There were no natural borders there, no mountains to shelter behind, no permanent cities to retreat into. Power belonged to whoever could move fastest, endure longest, and strike hardest. Tribes rose and collapsed constantly. Alliances were temporary. Men pledged loyalty in one season and slit throats in the next. A Khan who appeared invincible could wake abandoned by his followers before winter ended. Temujin entered this world around 1162, born into a minor clan whose fortunes shattered almost immediately. His father was poisoned by rivals when the boy was still young. After his death, the family was abandoned by its own tribe and left to survive alone on the open steppe. You can imagine the humiliation of it. A child once protected by warriors now digging roots from frozen earth with bare fingers. Hunting rats beside riverbanks while mounted clans passed in the distance without stopping. Hunger becoming so constant that it no longer feels sharp, only endless. At one point, conflict inside the starving family grew so desperate that Temujin killed his own older half-brother during a dispute over food and authority. The empire to come did not begin with glory. It began with fear, cold, and survival. For centuries, settled civilizations had viewed the nomads beyond their borders as scattered barbarians, dangerous but divided. Chinese dynasties built walls against them. Persian kingdoms bribed them. Traders feared them, yet most emperors believed the steppe's greatest weakness was its inability to unite. They did not understand what pressure was building there. Temujin grew into adulthood inside a world governed entirely by insecurity. Every alliance could fail. Every promise could fracture. Every rival tribe represented a future threat. But unlike many steppe leaders, he learned to transform desperation into structure. He rewarded loyalty over noble birth. He absorbed defeated tribes instead of simply slaughtering them. Warriors were promoted for skill and obedience rather than ancestry. Messengers crossed enormous distances through relay systems that later astonished foreign observers. Information moved quickly. Orders moved faster. Most importantly, he understood fear, not rage, not cruelty for its own sake. Fear used carefully could conquer cities before armies even arrived. When resistance became costly, destruction became theatrical. Survivors carried stories ahead of advancing cavalry. Entire populations fled after hearing what had happened elsewhere. Terror traveled farther than any scout. In 1206, after years of war, Temujin unified the Mongol tribes and received a new title from a great assembly of leaders, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. It sounded impossible then. The steppe had produced conquerors before, but empires born there rarely lasted. Tribal unity was fragile by nature. Success often carried the seeds of collapse within it. But Genghis Khan was building something different, not merely a kingdom held together by loyalty. A war system designed to expand continuously. The first targets lay beyond the northern borders of China, where the Jin dynasty ruled millions through fortified cities, bureaucracy, and agricultural wealth. To the Mongols, these lands appeared unimaginably rich. Silk, grain, metalwork, taxation, entire urban worlds far removed from the harsh economy of the steppe. Yet settled empires possessed weaknesses invisible to themselves. Their populations depended on roads remaining open, fields remaining planted, officials remaining obedient. Cities concentrated wealth behind walls, but walls could also become traps. A peasant army could panic, supply systems could collapse. Political rivals inside courts could sabotage one another while invaders advanced. The stronger the structure appeared, the more devastating its failure could become. Mongol warfare exploited this ruthlessly. Their armies moved with terrifying speed, sometimes covering more than 80 kilometers in a single day. Each warrior carried multiple horses, allowing rapid rotation during campaigns. They attacked supply lines, spread misinformation, isolated defenders, and withdrew suddenly only to return when enemies exhausted themselves in pursuit. And unlike many armies of the medieval world, the Mongols adapted constantly. Chinese engineers were forced to build siege weapons for them. Captured administrators governed conquered populations. Muslim merchants carried intelligence between regions. Every civilization the Mongols defeated strengthened the next campaign. In 1211, Mongol armies crossed into Jin territory in northern China. Cities burned across the frontier. Refugees crowded roads already stripped bare of food. Families dragged carts through snow carrying grain sacks, blankets, and elderly relatives too weak to walk. Some fortresses resisted for months before falling. Others surrendered immediately after hearing rumors of massacres elsewhere. One account describes defenders opening gates simply because they could no longer bear waiting for the siege to begin. Imagine standing atop those walls, looking outward across the plain and seeing dust rising in the distance, not knowing whether mercy still exists. By 1215, Zhongdu, the city that would later become Beijing, had fallen after prolonged siege and starvation. Fires consumed entire districts. Survivors described streets filled with corpses while smoke darkened the sky for days. Yet even as northern China collapsed into chaos, Genghis Khan was already looking west. Beyond the deserts and mountains stood the Khwarezmian Empire, a massive Islamic state controlling trade routes across Central Asia. Its cities flourished with scholars, merchants, craftsmen, and wealth flowing along the Silk Road. Diplomacy between the Mongols and the Khwarezmian ruler initially appeared possible. Then a governor executed a Mongol trade caravan. Soon after, the Shah humiliated and killed Mongol envoys sent to negotiate. In another age, this might have remained a border dispute. Instead, it became a death sentence for an empire. Because by then, the storm on the steppe had already learned how to cross continents. The merchants die first. Their bodies are left beside the road outside Otrar, exposed to the dry winds of Central Asia, while their goods are seized by local officials. Silk, silver, furs, letters carrying the seal of Genghis Khan himself. What began as a diplomatic mission is treated instead as espionage. Suspicion hardens into arrogance. The governor believes the Mongols are distant horsemen from the edge of the world, dangerous perhaps, but manageable. Then the envoys arrive. Their demand is simple: surrender the governor responsible, restore peace, and trade can continue. The Khwarezmian Shah answers by executing one envoy and shaving the beards of the others before sending them back in humiliation. In wealthy courts, rulers often mistake comfort for security. Marble halls, crowded markets, libraries filled with scholars. After enough years, all of it begins to feel permanent. Collapse becomes something that happens to weaker civilizations somewhere else. But permanence is one of history's most dangerous illusions. In 1219, the Mongols invaded the Khwarezmian Empire with an army that may have approached 200,000 men across multiple coordinated columns. Cities that had prospered for centuries suddenly found themselves isolated beneath advancing waves of cavalry. Bukhara fell first, then Samarkand, then Urgench. Each conquest fed the next. Prisoners were forced footed as human shields. Engineers dragged siege machines across deserts once thought impassable. Scouts rode so far in advance that defenders often heard rumors before they saw a single Mongol rider, and the rumors became weapons of their own. Some said the invaders never slept. Others claimed they drank blood during long campaigns or appeared simultaneously in different regions like spirits crossing the earth. Panic spread faster than facts. Entire populations fled before sieges even began, choking roads and exhausting supplies behind city walls. At Bukhara, Genghis Khan reportedly entered the city's great mosque after victory and addressed the terrified inhabitants gathered before him. "I am the punishment of God." Later chroniclers would write in his voice, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Whether the words were spoken exactly as recorded almost no longer mattered. People believed them. That belief was enough. Across Persia and Central Asia, resistance collapsed into catastrophe. Contemporary accounts describe cities emptied so thoroughly that dogs wandered streets without masters and irrigation canals filled with bodies. At Nishapur, after the death of a Mongol commander, vengeance became annihilation. Some chroniclers claimed even animals were slaughtered. Inside one ruined library, a Persian scholar reportedly searched through blackened manuscripts, while ash drifted through collapsed ceilings like snow. Around him, shelves still smoldered. Ink ran across burned pages beneath his hands. Centuries of accumulated knowledge reduced to smoke in a single campaign season. Numbers from medieval history are often exaggerated by fear and memory. Yet even conservative estimates suggest millions died during the Mongol conquests across Eurasia. Entire regions lost enormous portions of their populations within decades, and still the empire expanded. The speed of it disturbed even those far beyond the battlefield. In Europe, rumors arrived from the east like fragments of an approaching nightmare. Strange horsemen, cities erased, armies destroyed in days. Refugees speaking languages no one understood. Then, in the 1230s and 1240s, the Mongols came westward into Russia and Eastern Europe. Winter became part of the invasion. Russian princes who had spent generations fighting one another suddenly faced an enemy unlike anything they understood. Some cities resisted bravely. Others negotiated. Many simply burned. At Kiev in 1240, one of the great cities of Eastern Christianity, was devastated after siege and assault. Survivors described church bells ringing through smoke while families hid beneath stone floors listening to walls collapse overhead. The Mongols kept moving. Poland, Hungary, the plains of Central Europe. At the Battle of Mohi in 1241, Hungarian forces were shattered with terrifying efficiency. Mongol commanders used deception, encirclement, and coordinated retreat tactics perfected over decades of warfare on the steppe. European knights, trained for direct confrontation and personal valor, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to familiar rules. Arrows darkened the sky. Cavalry appeared where none should have been possible. Retreat became massacre. For a moment it seemed the entire continent might break open before them, and then, unexpectedly, the advance stopped. News arrived that Genghis Khan, son and successor of Genghis Khan, had died far away in Mongolia. Princes and generals turned eastward to participate in the struggle over succession. Europe survived partly because the empire itself demanded loyalty to blood, ritual, and inheritance, but the deeper transformation was already underway. The Mongols had not merely destroyed kingdoms, they had connected worlds. Trade routes across Eurasia reopened under Mongol protection in what later historians would call the Pax Mongolica. Merchants traveled farther and faster than before. Silk, spices, gunpowder, religious ideas, engineering knowledge, and astronomical discoveries crossed continents with unprecedented scale. Caravan routes, once considered deadly, became guarded arteries of commerce stretching from China to the Mediterranean. For rulers and merchants alike, the empire appeared to have achieved something extraordinary. Distance itself seemed to shrink. A trader could leave the markets of northern China and move west beneath Mongol protection through deserts, mountains, and foreign kingdoms connected by relay stations, military patrols, and diplomatic agreements. Marco Polo would later journey across these territories and return to Europe with stories that sounded impossible to many who heard them. Yet connection carried danger alongside prosperity. Caravans did not move alone, neither did disease. Far to the east, hidden within the movement of soldiers, traders, livestock, and cargo, another force had already begun traveling westward through the arteries of the Mongol world. One no cavalry on earth could outrun. The first signs were small enough to ignore. A fever inside a trading outpost, a caravan worker collapsing beside supply wagons somewhere along the Silk Road, rats moving through grain stores aboard merchant ships crossing the Black Sea. Nothing about it appeared world-ending at first. Illness was ordinary in the medieval world. Death was expected. Entire lives were built around its possibility. But by the 1340s, something far worse had begun moving through Eurasia. The empire that once connected continents through speed and security now carried plague across those same routes with terrifying efficiency. Trade roads, ports, military corridors, and protected merchant networks allowed goods to travel farther than ever before. They also allowed disease to move with unprecedented reach. In 1346, during the Mongol siege of the Genoese trading port at Kafo in Crimea, chroniclers described plague tearing through the besieging army itself. Some later accounts claimed infected bodies were hurled over the city walls. Whether fully accurate or not, the image endured because it captured the horror of the age, death itself becoming part of warfare. From there, ships carried the sickness westward. Constantinople, Sicily, Venice, Marseille. Then Europe began to drown in silence. The Black Death killed with terrifying speed. Victims developed fever, delirium, blackened swellings beneath the skin. Some died within days. Others collapsed in crowded streets before help arrived. Priests abandoned churches. Parents sealed infected children inside homes and fled in panic. Entire villages disappeared from tax records altogether. In parts of Italy, plague carts moved before dawn while bells rang through nearly empty streets. Laborers covered their faces with cloth soaked in vinegar as they carried bodies toward mass graves beyond city walls. In some regions, there were not enough living people left to bury the dead properly. Between 1347 and 1353, perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's population died. And behind the plague's movement stood the infrastructure of a world the Mongols had helped create. This was the contradiction at the center of their empire. The same system that accelerated trade, diplomacy, communication, and exchange also accelerated catastrophe across continents. Connectivity brought prosperity. It also erased distance between disasters. History rarely separates creation from destruction as cleanly as civilizations prefer to imagine. Yet even before the plague fully reshaped Eurasia, fractures had already begun appearing inside the Mongol Empire itself. The territory conquered by Genghis Khan and his descendants had become too immense, too culturally divided, and too politically fragile to remain unified forever. The descendants of Genghis ruled different regions as semi-independent khanates. In China, the Yuan dynasty governed through a blend of Mongol authority and Chinese bureaucracy. In Persia, Mongol rulers increasingly absorbed Islamic traditions. In the Russian lands, the Golden Horde dominated through tribute and military pressure. But every expanding system eventually encounters the same problem. The larger it grows, the harder it becomes to hold together. Succession crises deepened. Trade weakened. Local elites resisted foreign rule. Famine and plague destabilized populations already strained by decades of taxation and war. Mongol identity itself slowly began dissolving into the civilizations the conquerors had once overwhelmed. In China, resentment toward Yuan rule intensified throughout the 14th century. Floods, inflation, forced labor, and corruption fed rebellion across the countryside. Secret societies spread unrest among peasants already exhausted by hardship. Then came the Red Turban revolts. By 1368, the Yuan dynasty collapsed as rebel forces seized Beijing and established the Ming dynasty. Mongol rulers fled northward toward the same steppe from which their empire had emerged more than a century earlier. The storm had spent itself. But the world it created remained. Long after Mongol political power fractured, the consequences of their empire continued shaping global history. They transformed warfare through mobility and psychological strategy. They expanded trade networks across Eurasia. They accelerated cultural exchange between East and West. Technologies, commerce, religious ideas, and knowledge traveled farther because Mongol conquest had forced civilizations into contact. Even the modern world carries echoes of that transformation. Goods crossing continents overnight. Information moving instantly across borders. Diseases spreading through interconnected systems faster than societies can react. Vast powers discovering that expansion creates vulnerabilities as well as strength. The Mongols understood movement better than the civilizations they conquered. But no empire outruns time forever. Today, the grasslands of Mongolia still stretch beneath immense skies much as they did in the days of Temujin. Winds still move across the steppe, where riders once gathered beneath banners of horsehair and bone. The cities they destroyed have risen again in different forms. The borders they shattered hardened into nations. The terror faded into memory. Yet history still remembers the sound of their approach. Not only because they conquered so much, but because they exposed something permanent about civilization itself. Every system that grows powerful also grows fragile, in ways its rulers rarely see until it is too late. And sometimes the people who change the world begin as hungry children beneath cold skies. No one else is watching. I am watching the past so we can understand the present, and together we keep history alive.